There's a pattern to generational wealth that most people don't understand. Getting rich is hard. Staying rich for one generation is harder. Staying rich for 5 generations is nearly impossible. In 1973, when 120 Vanderbilt descendants gathered for a family reunion, not one of them was a millionaire. The Vanderbilts went from the richest family in America to broke in 3 generations. That's the normal pattern. Fortunes built in 1 generation are spent in 3. But there's one family that broke that pattern. One family that has been wealthy not for 3 generations, but for 8. Not for 50 years, but for 210 years. Not in one country, but across 5 nations simultaneously. The Rothschild family. In 1815, the 5 Rothschild brothers controlled more wealth than any royal family in Europe. By 1850, they were called the 6th great power of Europe, alongside Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Not a nation, a family. In 1900, the Rothschilds were still the richest family in the world. In 2025, after 2 world wars, the Great Depression, communism, fascism, hyperinflation, and 8 generations, the Rothschilds are still worth an estimated $400 billion to $1 trillion across hundreds of descendants. Nobody knows for certain. Because unlike the Vanderbilts, who lost it all, or the Rockefellers, who are slowly diluting their wealth, the Rothschilds have mastered something no other family has: the ability to stay invisible while staying wealthy, the ability to transfer power across generations without losing control, the ability to survive every financial crisis, every war, every revolution for over 2 centuries. This is the story of how one family became the richest in history, not through one brilliant founder, but through a system, a network, a strategy that has worked for 210 years and counting. The 5 sons strategy, the information advantage, the both sides of every war strategy, the central banking capture, and the mechanisms that keep the wealth growing even when individual members make mistakes. This is the Rothschild pattern, and once you understand it, you'll understand how dynastic wealth actually works. Not the fairy tale version, but the real version where information is power, networks are wealth, and staying invisible is the key to staying rich. Before we get into how they did it, you need to understand where they started, because the Rothschilds didn't begin as wealthy aristocrats. They began in a ghetto. In 1744, Meyer Amschel Rothschild was born in the Frankfurt Udanasse, the Jewish ghetto, a single street in Frankfurt where Jews were forced to live, walled off from the rest of the city. By law, Jews couldn't own land. They couldn't join guilds, they couldn't hold most professions, but they could lend money because Christian law prohibited usury, charging interest on loans. Jews had no such prohibition. So money lending became a Jewish profession, not by choice but by necessity. Mayor Amschel's father was a small-time money changer and trader, nothing special. When his father died, Mayer was 13. He was sent to work at the Oppenheimer Bank in Hanover. He learned banking. He learned how royal courts operated. He learned that powerful people always need money. And he learned that the person who controls the money controls the powerful people. That was the insight that built a dynasty. By his 20s, Mayor Amschel returned to Frankfurt. He started dealing in rare coins, not currency, collectible coins. Why coins? Because coin collecting was fashionable among European nobility. It gave Mayer access to princes and dukes, people with real power. In 1769, Mayer became court factor to Prince William of Hanau. That means financial agent. Mayer managed Prince William's money, invested it, lent it out, and took a cut. This was the entry point. Prince William became one of the richest men in Europe by renting out Hessian soldiers to the British during the American Revolution. 30,000 German mercenaries were paid for by the British Crown, and Prince William's money, millions of pounds, was managed by Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mayer didn't just manage it, he multiplied it. He invested it across Europe, lent it to other governments, and made both the prince and himself very wealthy. But here's what made Mayer different from every other court Jew, every other financier. He didn't keep the business to himself. He built a network. He had 10 children, 5 sons and 5 daughters, and he trained all 5 sons in banking from childhood. Then he did something no one else had done. He sent them to different financial capitals of Europe to establish banks. Not one bank, 5 banks, one family, 5 countries. All coordinating, all sharing information, all working together. Let me show you the strategy. In 1798, Nathan Rothschild, the 3rd son, was sent to Manchester, England. Then London. He became N.M. Rothschild and Sons. In 1811, James Rothschild, the youngest son, was sent to Paris. He became the Rothschild heir. Salomon Rothschild was sent to Vienna. He became S.M. von Rothschild. Karl Rothschild was sent to Naples. He became C.M. Rothschild and Figley. And Amschel Rothschild Jr., the oldest son, stayed in Frankfurt to run M.A. Rothschild and Sons. 5 brothers, 5 cities, Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, Naples. These weren't just the financial capitals of Europe. These were the capitals of the 5 great powers after Napoleon's defeat: Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and the Italian states. The Rothschilds had a bank in every major power simultaneously. And here's the genius. They remained one family, one business. They coordinated. If the British government needed a loan, Nathan in London could arrange it. But the money might come from Salomon in Vienna or James in Paris. If the Austrian emperor needed financing, Salomon could provide it using funds from Nathan in London. They moved money across borders before modern banking systems existed. They could finance anyone. Because they had brothers in every capital, they had information no one else had. Political information, military information, economic information. In an era when communication traveled at the speed of horses and ships, the Rothschilds had a private courier network faster than any government. They used carrier pigeons, fast ships, and encrypted messages. They knew what was happening in Paris before the British government did. They knew what was happening in Vienna before the French government did. That information advantage was worth more than gold. Now let me show you how they used it. In 1815, during the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon escaped from exile. He raised an army. All of Europe was at war again. The outcome would determine the future of the continent. If Napoleon won, France would dominate Europe and British government bonds would crash. If Britain won, Napoleon was finished and British bonds would soar. The battle was fought on June 18, 1815, near Waterloo in present-day Belgium. Nathan Rothschild was in London. The outcome of the battle would take days to reach London by official channels, but Nathan had agents at the battlefield. The moment Wellington defeated Napoleon, a Rothschild agent named Rothworth raced to the coast. He took a boat across the English Channel and arrived in London on June 20th, a full day before the official messenger. Nathan Rothschild knew the outcome of Waterloo before the British government did, before anyone in London knew. Here's what he did, and this is documented. Nathan went to the London Stock Exchange. He stood in his usual spot and started selling British government bonds heavily. Everyone in the exchange watched Nathan. The Rothschilds always knew first. If Nathan was selling, it meant bad news. It meant Napoleon must have won. Other traders panicked and started selling. British bonds crashed. The price collapsed. Then Nathan's agents started buying quietly, buying everything at the lowest prices. When the official news arrived the next day, Wellington had won. British bonds soared. Nathan had bought at the bottom. He made somewhere between $1 million and $20 million on that single trade. The exact amount is disputed, but it was enough to make Nathan Rothschild the richest man in Britain overnight. And it proved something. Information was more valuable than armies. That was 1815. That single event, the Waterloo trade, made the Rothschild name legendary, but it wasn't luck. It was the system, the 5-brother network, the information advantage, the ability to move faster than governments, and they kept using it for decades. After Napoleon's defeat, Europe needed to rebuild. Governments needed loans, massive loans, to pay for armies, to pay war debts, to rebuild infrastructure, and the Rothschilds financed them, all of them. The British government, the Austrian emperor, the King of Prussia, the French monarchy, even the Vatican. Between 1815 and 1850, the Rothschilds arranged loans worth hundreds of millions of pounds. They didn't just lend money, they became indispensable. If you were a European government and you needed financing, you went to the Rothschilds because they could raise capital across multiple countries simultaneously. They had the network and a reputation for always getting paid back. Here's how they ensured repayment. They didn't just lend money, they took control of tax revenues. If Austria borrowed money, the Rothschilds would control Austrian customs duties until the loan was repaid. If Naples borrowed money, the Rothschilds would control tobacco tax revenues. They didn't trust governments to pay voluntarily, they took control of the revenue streams. That's how you stay wealthy. You don't hope people pay you back, you make sure they have no choice. Let me show you the scale. By 1825, Nathan Rothschild in London was more powerful than the Bank of England. In 1825, Britain faced a financial crisis. Banks were failing and panic was spreading. The Bank of England was running out of gold reserves. The government needed a massive emergency loan to stabilize the banking system. They went to Nathan Rothschild. Nathan arranged a loan of $10 million, an absolutely staggering sum at the time, the equivalent of over $1 billion today. He raised it by coordinating with his brothers across Europe. Gold shipped from Paris, silver from Vienna, bills of exchange from Frankfurt. Within weeks, the crisis was averted. The British government called Nathan the commander-in-chief of the City of London, not a banker, a commander, because that's what he was. He commanded capital, and whoever commands capital commands nations. By 1850, the Rothschild family collectively was worth more than all the royal families of Europe combined. They were called the sixth great power alongside the five major nations. Think about that. Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and the Rothschilds. Not a country, a family, that's unprecedented power. They kept it for a century. Now, let me explain how they didn't just get rich from government loans. They diversified into everything that mattered. They financed the Industrial Revolution, railroads, mining, infrastructure. In the 1830s and 40s, railroads were revolutionizing transportation. But building railroads required massive capital. Governments and private companies needed financing. The Rothschilds financed railroad construction across Europe. In France, they financed the Chemin de Fer du Nord. In Austria, they financed the Nordbond. In Britain, they held stakes in multiple rail companies. By 1860, the Rothschilds controlled more railroad mileage across Europe than any other family or company. They didn't just finance railroads, they owned them. And railroads were the technology of the age, like controlling internet infrastructure today. Whoever controlled the railroads controlled trade, commerce, and economic development. The Rothschilds controlled the railroads. They also controlled mining. In the 1830s, the Rothschilds gained control of the Almaden mercury mine in Spain, the largest mercury deposit in the world. Mercury was essential for silver refining. Control mercury, and you control silver production across the Americas. By the 1850s, they controlled Rio Tinto Mining Company in Spain, copper mining and iron mining. They acquired De Beers diamond mines in South Africa. At one point, the Rothschilds controlled a significant portion of the world's diamond supply. They financed the Suez Canal construction in Egypt. When Egypt couldn't repay the loans, the Rothschilds took shares in the canal company. They financed oil exploration in Baku, modern Azerbaijan, through the Rothschild Oil Company, which competed with Rockefeller's Standard Oil in the 1880s. The Rothschilds weren't just bankers, they were industrialists. They owned physical assets that generated wealth regardless of financial markets. That's wealth preservation. Financial assets can crash. Physical assets, mines, railroads, and land retain value. The Rothschilds understood this better than anyone. Now, here's the part most people don't understand about the Rothschilds. They didn't just finance governments during peacetime. They financed both sides of wars simultaneously. This is documented, not a conspiracy theory, but a historical fact. During the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, the Rothschilds financed both Austria and Prussia, both sides. During the Franco-Russian War of 1877, they financed both France and Prussia. Why would you finance both sides of a war? 3 reasons. First, you guarantee you're on the winning side. Whoever wins owes you money, and the winner can pay. Second, you have leverage over both sides. If you're financing a government's war, that government needs you. They can't afford to antagonize you. Third, wars are incredibly profitable. Governments borrow massive sums during wars, interest rates are high, and risk premiums are high. If you're the only family that can raise capital across multiple countries during a crisis, you can charge whatever you want. The Rothschilds made fortunes from wars, not by selling weapons, but by providing the financing that made wars possible. And after the wars, they financed the reconstruction. They made money going in, and they made money coming out. That's the system. Here's a specific example. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. The Union needed financing. The Confederacy needed financing. August Belmont, the Rothschild agent in New York, helped arrange financing for the Union through bond sales in Europe. Meanwhile, other Rothschild agents explored financing options for the Confederacy. The Rothschilds officially remained neutral, but they were positioning to finance both sides if possible. The Union won. The Rothschilds made money from Union bonds. After the war, they financed American railroad expansion westward. They made money from war. They made money from peace. That's how you build wealth that lasts centuries. You're never on one side. You're on the side of capital, and capital doesn't care who wins. Capital only cares about returns. Now let me explain the most important part of the Rothschild system, why they stayed wealthy when other families lost everything. Family structure and rules. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the founder, established rules that the family followed for generations. The first rule: all major business decisions required consensus among the brothers. No single brother could make a decision that affected the whole family. This prevented any one member from destroying the family wealth through bad decisions. Second rule: only male heirs could inherit and control the business. This kept wealth concentrated. The Vanderbilts divided wealth among all children. The Rothschilds kept control with the sons and gave daughters dowries, but not business control. Controversial today, but it preserved the empire for 8 generations. Third rule: marriages within the family were encouraged. Rothschild cousins married Rothschild cousins. This kept wealth in the family. It also ensured that spouses understood the business and the rules. Over half of Rothschild marriages in the 1800s were between cousins. This is why genetic disorders eventually appeared in later generations. But it also kept the dynasty intact. Fourth rule: extreme discretion. The Rothschilds pioneered financial privacy. They didn't brag. They didn't show off. Unlike the Vanderbilts, who built massive mansions and threw legendary parties, the Rothschilds lived well but quietly. Their wealth was in banks, bonds, and businesses, not in visible displays. This protected them during revolutions, wars, and social upheavals. When mobs burned palaces, they left Rothschild properties alone. When governments seized estates, they often exempted Rothschild holdings because the Rothschilds had leverage. They controlled the loans governments needed. Fifth rule: diversification across countries. This was the genius of the Five Sons strategy. When France had a revolution in 1848, the Paris Rothschilds were fine because the London, Vienna, Frankfurt, and Naples branches kept operating. When World War I destroyed the Austrian and German branches, the British and French branches survived. When World War II and the Holocaust devastated the European branches, the British and American branches preserved the family wealth. No single country collapse could destroy the family. That's resilience built into the structure. Let me show you how this worked through historical catastrophes. 1848. Revolutions across Europe. France, Austria, Prussia, Italian states. Monarchies were overthrown. Governments collapsed. Chaos. The Rothschilds lost money in the short term, but within 2 years, order was restored. And guess who financed the restoration? The Rothschilds. They made back their losses and more. 1914, 1918, World War I. The Rothschild Bank in Vienna, Austria-Hungary, was on the losing side. Assets seized, bank closed. The Rothschild Bank in Frankfurt, Germany, was on the losing side. Assets damaged. But the Rothschild banks in London and Paris, Britain, and France were on the winning side. Assets preserved. The family survived because they were diversified across the winners and losers. 1917 Russian Revolution. The Rothschilds had significant investments in Russia, oil fields in Baku, railroad investments, mining interests. The Bolsheviks seized everything. The Rothschilds lost an estimated 50 to 100 million in today's dollars, a massive loss. But it wasn't enough to destroy the family because they had wealth in Britain, France, and America. They absorbed the loss and moved on. That's what diversification does. You can lose 10 to 20% of your wealth and survive if the other 80 or 90% is protected. 1929, 1939, the Great Depression, global financial collapse, banks failed, fortunes were destroyed. The Rothschilds lost money. Everyone lost money, but they didn't lose control of their core banks. N.M. Rothschild in London survived, the Rothschild Frères in Paris survived, and when World War II came, guess who financed the British and French war efforts? The Rothschilds. They made back their depression losses from war loans, 1939, 1945, World War II. The Nazis specifically targeted Jewish wealth. They seized Rothschild properties in Austria, Germany, and France. The Vienna Rothschild Palace was taken by the Nazis. Baron Louis de Rothschild was arrested in Austria and held for ransom. The family paid millions to free him. The French Rothschild estates were occupied, but the British Rothschilds were safe. The American Rothschilds were safe. After the war, the family reclaimed properties and rebuilt. Not to pre-war levels in continental Europe, but they survived. And survival is what matters across centuries. Now let me show you the modern Rothschild empire, because this is where it gets interesting. Most people think the Rothschilds lost their wealth in the 20th century. That's wrong. They adapted. In 1960, the Rothschild banks merged operations. The separate national branches started coordinating more formally. N.M. Rothschild in London became the flagship. In 1981, the French socialist government under Mitterrand nationalized Bonner Rothschild in Paris. The French Rothschilds lost their bank, but within 3 years they opened a new bank, Rothschild and CIE. They rebuilt from scratch. By 2000, the French Rothschild Bank was one of the most profitable private banks in Europe. You can't keep the Rothschilds down. They've survived worse. Today, the main Rothschild operations are Rothschild and Co. Nears, Paris and London, one of the largest independent financial advisory firms in the world. They advise on mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, and wealth management. In 2023, their revenue was $2.4 billion. This isn't a relic of the past. This is a modern, highly profitable financial firm. The Rothschild family also has massive private holdings. The Edmund de Rothschild Group, which focuses on banking and private wealth management, was founded in 1953. As of 2023, they have over $150 billion in assets under management. Rett Capital Partners Investment Trust, founded by Lord Jacob Rothschild, has a market cap of over $3 billion and invests in hedge funds, private equity, real estate, Watton Manor, and estates. They have massive land holdings in England and France, including chateau vineyards and art collections. Some of the finest wine estates in France are Chateau Lafite Rothschild and Chateau Mouton Rothschild, with wine that sells for thousands of dollars per bottle. These aren't just vineyards, they're brands and luxury assets. The family also has venture capital and private equity investments through various vehicles in clean energy, technology, real estate, and mining. They're not just doing 19th century banking. They're invested in 21st century industries. Now, here's the question everyone asks, how much are the Rothschilds worth? Nobody knows for certain, and that's intentional. The family doesn't publish consolidated financials. There's no Rothschild incubators with public filings. There are hundreds of Rothschild descendants, maybe over 500 worth. Each branch has separate wealth. Some estimates suggest a conservative estimate of $400 billion based on known assets, historical wealth compounding at average rates, and documented holdings. An aggressive estimate is $1 trillion or more, assuming hidden assets, private holdings, and trusts that aren't publicly disclosed. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Let's say $500 to $700 billion is spread across over 500 descendants. That's an average of $1 to $1.4 billion per descendant, but it's not evenly distributed. Senior family members who control the banks are worth tens of billions, while distant cousins might be worth only hundreds of millions. Either way, the Rothschilds are almost certainly richer than the Waltons, whose family is worth $247 billion, and the Mars family worth $160 billion, and possibly richer than any other family on Earth. The only comparison is the Saudi royal family, the House of Saud, estimated at $1.4 trillion, but that's with 15,000 members. The Rothschilds have maintained concentrated wealth across far fewer people for far longer. Here's why the Rothschild wealth is hard to track: trusts, private companies, foundations, and offshore holdings. The family pioneered financial privacy. Their wealth isn't in one place. It's distributed across private banks in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Monaco. Real estate is held through trusts in multiple jurisdictions, along with art collections. The Rothschilds own some of the world's finest art held privately. Businesses are owned through holding companies with opaque structures. When you see a billionaire list like Forbes, the Rothschilds barely appear. Why? Because the list tracks individuals with publicly disclosed wealth. If your wealth is in private companies, trusts, and held across 20 family members, you don't show up on the list. That's intentional. The Vanderbilts showed up on lists and lost everything. The Rothschilds stay off lists and keep everything. Now let me compare the Rothschilds to other families to show you what makes them different. The Vanderbilts got rich in one generation: Cornelius Vanderbilt, railroads and shipping, 1870s. By generation 3, spending exceeded wealth creation. Massive mansions cost millions per year to maintain. There was no business building in later generations and no trusts to protect wealth. By 1973, there were 0 millionaires among 120 descendants. Total failure of wealth preservation. The Rockefellers got rich in one generation. John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil in the 1900s, created trusts to preserve wealth. Currently, they are worth about $11 billion across 200-plus descendants. Successful wealth preservation, but diluting. Each generation has less per capita than the previous generation. The dynasty is slowly fading. Still wealthy, but not growing. The Rothschilds got rich over 2 generations. Mayer and his 5 sons, 1800-1850. They created a network, not just a trust, diversified across countries, industries, and asset types. They have survived every crisis for 210 years. Currently, they are worth $400 billion to $1 trillion across 500-plus descendants. Wealth is not just preserved, it's still growing. That's the difference. Here's why the Rothschilds succeeded where others failed. They never stopped working. The Vanderbilts retired. The 3rd generation didn't build anything. They just spent. The Rothschilds kept building. Each generation entered the family business or started new ventures. They invested in industries like banking, mining, wine, and energy. They stayed relevant. They diversified across countries. The Vanderbilts were American. When America went through a crisis, they were fully exposed. The Rothschilds were European, American, and later global. When one country collapsed, another branch carried the family. They stayed private. The Vanderbilts went public with their wealth, built the biggest mansions, threw the most extravagant parties, made themselves targets. The Rothschilds stayed quiet. They built beautiful estates, yes, but they didn't flaunt wealth. They valued privacy, and privacy protects wealth. They maintained family control. The Rothschilds have family members actively managing the banks and businesses. The Vanderbilts handed control to outside managers who often mismanaged or stole. The Rockefellers used professional trustees. The Rothschilds use family. That's different. When family controls the business, there's a long-term perspective. No short-term profit maximization at the expense of the family legacy. Let me address the conspiracy theories. Because the Rothschilds are the subject of more conspiracy theories than any other family in history. Some people claim the Rothschilds control all central banks. False. The Rothschilds do not control the Federal Reserve. They do not control the Bank of England. They do not control the European Central Bank. Yes, Nathan Rothschild helped stabilize the Bank of England in 1825. Yes, the Rothschilds financed governments extensively in the 1800s, but they don't control central banks today. Central banks are government institutions. The Rothschilds have influence like any major financial institution, but not control. Some people claim the Rothschilds start wars for profit, exaggerated. Did the Rothschilds finance both sides of some wars in the 1800s? Yes, documented. But starting wars? No evidence. Governments start wars for political reasons. The Rothschilds provided financing. That's not the same as causing the war. Some people claim the Rothschilds control the world economy, exaggerated. Are they one of the most powerful financial families? Yes. Do they have $500+ billion in wealth and massive influence? Yes. Do they control the world economy? No. There are other powerful families, Waltons, Mars, Kochs. There are sovereign wealth funds, Norway, Saudi Arabia, UAE. There are tech billionaires, Musk, Bezos, Gates. The Rothschilds are powerful, but they're not omnipotent. Why do conspiracy theories target the Rothschilds? 3 reasons. First, anti-Semitism. The Rothschilds are Jewish, and for centuries, Jews were blamed for financial problems, even when they had nothing to do with them. Nazi propaganda specifically targeted the Rothschilds as symbols of Jewish financial control. That poisoned discourse persists. Second, secrecy. The Rothschilds value privacy. They don't do interviews, they don't publish wealth figures. That secrecy creates speculation. People fill the information gap with theories. Third, they actually were incredibly powerful. In the 1800s, the Rothschilds really did finance governments and influence politics. That historical power gets exaggerated and extended into modern conspiracy theories that claim they still have that level of control. They don't, but the historical basis makes the theories seem plausible to people who don't research the facts. Here's what's actually true about the Rothschilds today. They're one of the richest families in the world, probably in the top 3. They control highly profitable financial advisory and wealth management firms. They have influence in financial markets and government finance in Europe. They are politically connected in Britain and France particularly. They invest in modern industries, tech, clean energy, and real estate. They maintain large private art collections and estates. They donate extensively to charity and cultural institutions. They value privacy and avoid public attention. They continue to follow family governance rules that emphasize long-term wealth preservation over short-term consumption. That's it. They're incredibly wealthy. They're influential in finance. They're private, but they're not controlling the world from a secret room. Let me give you the pattern, the Rothschild pattern for generational wealth. First, start with an information advantage. The Rothschilds had the fastest communication network in Europe in the 1800s. Today, information moves instantly, but they still have an advantage. Insider access to corporate deals, government finance, and financial markets. They're advisors to governments and corporations. They know what's happening before it's public. That's the modern version of the same advantage. Second, diversify across countries and industries. Never concentrate wealth in one nation or one asset class. The Rothschilds learned this in the 1800s. It's still their strategy today. Banks in multiple countries, investments in wine, real estate, mining, energy, and tech. If one industry collapses, others carry the family. Third, maintain family control. Don't hand control to outsiders. The Rothschilds still have family members running the major banks and investment firms. Professional managers assist, but family makes final decisions. This ensures long-term thinking. Outsiders optimize for short-term bonuses. Family optimizes for century-long preservation. Fourth, stay private. Don't flaunt wealth. Don't make yourself a target. The Rothschilds don't do reality TV. They don't post on social media about their wealth. They own beautiful estates, but they're not trying to have the biggest yacht or the most expensive party. Privacy protects you from envy, from lawsuits, from government seizure, and from kidnappers. Wealth attracts predators. Privacy keeps predators away. Fifth, use trusts and legal structures. The Rothschilds pioneered the use of trusts to transfer wealth across generations without taxes. They use foundations for art and charitable assets. They use holding companies for business assets. They structure everything to minimize taxes and maximize control across generations. This is the Rockefeller playbook too. but the Rothschilds did it first. Sixth, survive crisis. Don't panic. The Rothschilds have survived the Napoleonic Wars, the 1848 revolutions, World War I, the Russian Revolution, the Great Depression, World War II, the Holocaust, nationalizations, and every financial crisis since. How? By being diversified, by having liquidity, and by being patient. When assets are cheap during a crisis, they buy. When markets recover, they profit. That's how you turn crises into opportunities. Let me show you the numbers on how this compounds. Let's say the Rothschilds were worth $100 million in 1850, a conservative estimate based on historical accounts. That's the baseline. If that wealth compounds at 7% per year, a reasonable rate for diversified investments, what's it worth today after 175 years? Now let me address the elephant in the room. Why do we care about the Rothschilds? Why does this matter? Because the Rothschild story is the story of how the global financial system actually works, not how we're told it works in textbooks, but how it actually works. The Rothschilds prove that information is power. Whoever knows first wins. That's still true in financial markets today. High-frequency trading firms make billions by being microseconds faster than others. It's the same principle the Rothschilds used with carrier pigeons in 1815. They proved that financing beats ownership. You don't need to own the factory to control the factory. You just need to own the debt. Whoever controls the financing controls the business. That's true for corporations, governments, and individuals. Debt is control. They proved that both sides' strategies work, finance multiple sides of a conflict or deal, and you always win. This is how modern banks work. They lend to companies that compete with each other. They finance acquisitions on both sides. They don't care who wins. They care about fees. They prove that crises are opportunities.